The Manera case is an example of the way that our intuition really tells us the law ought to work. We have this notion of justification, and it's codified in the Pennsylvania statute. And it just seems to be sort of what we feel like, I would think, most of you feel like, the right answer ought to be in these sorts of situations. If you can prevent a greater evil by a lesser evil, then wouldn't we really prefer that to happen? So in the Manera case, the defendant is on, or has had her license suspended for DUI. During the suspension, however, she needs to drive because of one of her children's medical emergencies. So she does it, and it's contrary to the law. This is problematic because, we don't want people breaking the law. The law has consequences. This is part of her punishment. She's doing something that is evading what society has imposed upon her, and that's wrong, and that is a type of evil. But on the other hand, if she doesn't get this medicine for her daughter could have very serious medical consequences, or potentially even die. Would we rather someone violate the terms of their suspension of driving privileges, or would we rather have a human being have serious medical consequences and potentially die? When you put the question that way, it's really clear what the answer is. Now, when we get to later questions, we're going to find that justification is much more difficult in particular cases to unpack than this fairly obvious example. This is just a regulatory thing. It is a criminal punishment that's been imposed on her, and we don't want to make light of that, but this is not a judgment call in any way. And when we get to the later cases, we'll see where, when there are judgment calls, that the defense of justification is not available, that it has to be just a clear answer that no one would want you doing anything to the contrary. Kind of begs the question of why these cases are even prosecuted. But because prosecutors have absolute discretion not to bring these types of charges, or any charge. So why do we even need the justification? And this just sort of prevents your more aggressive prosecutor who would try to bring such a charge. But the notion here is, like, when it's just very, very clear that a greater evil could be prevented by doing something that is illegal, but that illegal act is much less consequential for society than, or is just less consequential for society than what's going to happen if the law is not violated, then we want people to break the law. It's almost in a way like efficient breaches of contract from contract law. That when you face this choice, we want the better outcome for society. So we'll get into harder questions, but this one was actually fairly easy. The only wrinkle that the court had was whether the legislature had intended to remove the defense of justification from this particular statute, because the trial court said that the legislature had created enhanced penalties or more severe penalties over time for violating the statute. The trial court said from that it inferred that the legislature meant to eliminate the defense of justification, and the appellate court says, I don't know how you got there. That's not a logical inference from that legislative action. So this is our intro to justifications, and we'll get to some subsequent, much harder problems.